February 17, 2021 to order. The time is now 6:01. First up is item A, which is our proposed uses of the CDBG CV3 funds. And Peter Donovan is here to present this item. Peter.
Thank you, Mayor. Hi, Council. Yes, the CDBG CV3 funds, and that is a lot to say. It's a lot to keep straight, too, with all of the CDBG items that Council has sort of had thrown at you in the last 12 months. I just want to kind of give a quick overview about what CV3 is, what it's not. You guys have all heard, of course, of CDBG. You have your regular CDBG, not to be confused with your CDBG CV1 funds, which can often get confused with CDBG CV3 funds, which can often get confused with CDBG CV3PO, who's not the droid that you're looking for, I'm told. So tonight, I want you to focus on just three basic sort of pots of CDBG funding. CDBG, when you see the CV after it, that's our COVID relief funding, and that's CARES Act funding that the federal government has sent to CDBG recipients, and the city allocated that to a number of different sources. That first CD1 payment was in the amount of $2 to the city of Mount Vernon, and council and the city decided to help out small businesses in the city, as well as tenants and landlords who needed assistance. So that's where your CDBG CV1, so your first round of COVID funding went. We're going to talk about a second round of COVID funding to hit the city this spring, and you probably are wondering what happened to CV2 funding. That's funding that actually didn't go to cities, at least in our case. The State Department of Commerce received that and allocated that to Skagit County. So it did hit our local economy. The CDBG distribution that staff is recommending, a little bit more about that in a minute, is $130,000 in motel vouchers and $130,000 in acquiring shelter. And then you have your just regular CDBG, and that's going to be important in the weeks ahead. That is the action plan that we do every year. It supports a larger 5-year consolidated plan, and it goes to support housing, human services, and just kind of general community support. So with that regular CDBG, you're going to see that next week. The process for that we go through every year is we have a public hearing, so you'll have that next week, where we invite the community to come and talk about some of the needs as they see it, how those needs fit into the city's consolidated plan. They support the consolidated plan. So we'll listen to those needs, we'll take those back, consider those as we draft our action plan. Action plan is an annual plan that supports the consolidated plan. So that happens from February to March, and then in April, we bring that draft back to the public. There's another public hearing for that. Council listens to that, approves that plan, hopefully, and then we submit that to HUD. And then they approve that sometime during the summer, and usually in the third quarter, we get that allocation of funding for those CDBG recipients. So tonight, the CV3, our second round of COVID relief funding, the city's been allocated about $262,000. And one of the recommendations that we're making after talking with Skagit County Public Health and Community Action and kind of getting a feel for the needs in the community, right now, a really big need is that immediate low barrier shelter, just getting people off the streets, especially during COVID, when congregate shelter is not safe and not a great idea. So Community Action, we asked them what their needs were. They sort of broke it down by month, and really looking at trying to get support that they've had through the fall and early winter months extended through the rest of winter and into spring, if possible. And what we're really hoping for is to buy some time until another shelter project maybe is up and running. But that total need from Community Action is $185,400 to serve the folks that they're housing right now in hotels around the area. That is a county-wide need. And so they estimate that about 70% of those who they are helping are Mount Vernon or would consider themselves normally Mount Vernon residents. So about $130,000 would be our Mount Vernon's cut of that. Second recommendation would be to support what's going on in Burlington. Mayor Steve Sexton visited Mount Vernon City Council and shared with you some of the shelter vision that he had. These pallet shelters, they can be found at palletshelter.com, would be the housing units that Burlington is looking at. Would be a good investment as well for Mount Vernon if in the future, if we needed to have something like this. There are no plans for that now. But right now, just something that we can help out and kind of do our share to support what's happening in Burlington, which again is a piece of a much larger puzzle and flow of services that are needed. Just this entry, low barrier shelter need. So the city of Burlington is considering a city-owned property for these, and that property would support residents from all of these Skagit County cities. The shelters cost about, it depends, there are a couple different sizes, but about $7,000 to $10,000 each. And that includes, that low end includes apparently hooking these up to electricity, getting them warm. So they're relatively inexpensive, and that $130,000 would allow Mount Vernon to purchase 10 to 17 of these shelters. So these would be owned by the city of Mount Vernon, and they would be loaned to Burlington Peace Road Transitional Cabins Project. That's not a final title. That's a working title for them right now, but they would go to support that effort. And that was a very quick overview, but I'm happy to answer questions or field some ideas if council has any.
So again, we're just proposing some ideas and clearly want to chat it over with council. So any thoughts from council on this?
Peter, I think you've done a pretty good job putting this together. We had the discussion about seeing what we could do to help Mount Vernon residents that might have a need for the shelter space in Burlington, and I think you've addressed that here. And again, we've got folks in our community that need those hotel vouchers at this time. So I think the effort here is good. It's I think the direction that most of the council has suggested we go.
Right. Thanks, Mark. Any other comments, Mary?
Yeah, I'll say I agree with what Mark said. I think this is a great breakdown on the use of that money, and I think it makes very good sense. And I'm excited, if you will, about the possibility of having some of our money go to some of these transitional homes for that we could possibly use for ourselves in the future, or could be sort of earmarked for Erin and her needs. Obviously, we want to help whoever we can. So I agree.
Let's see. I have no questions about the hotel vouchers. That's pretty straightforward. I think it's a good idea. However, the pallet shelters, what I read over here, the cost approximately is between $5,000 to $7,000 each. In Mr. Donovan's presentation, the numbers are from $7,000 to $10,000. So I'm just trying to get a better picture. That would be my question there.
Yeah, so the very low end, the smallest shelter that palletshelter.com offers actually is listed at $4,000. So $4,000 would be the basic. However, in order to equip these with heaters and lights, those expenses, when you start adding to them, they vary. So I would say, just for a ballpark, 4,000 is going to be the minimum. I think the largest size they had on their site was listed at 10,000. Again, that's without any of the accessories, if you will, that go with that.
Good to point out, Juan. I think what we would want to do is coordinate with Mayor Sexton and find out exactly what what they want and which amenities that they were planning on in those shelters. So as Peter said, there's add-ons for electricity and a small heater, and then there's two different sizes. And so what I understand from Mayor Sexton is they do want ones that are fully equipped, with heating and electricity, but they haven't worked out exactly how many of which size they might want. And so once that kind of becomes clear, we would want to, contribute, what the plan would be from them, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, that helps out. Minimum to maximum 4 to 10. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
I also believe that you need to put furniture or bedding and stuff in there too. That's not included in the overall price of the units themselves. So we may have units, but we still have to have some place for people to sleep. So I think that the total cost is going to be more than what we see on the website.
I wanted to know if you had an opportunity to go over and see the pallet shelter that's set up at the Burlington City Hall. Have you had a chance to go over there and take a look at it?
No, I haven't gotten the opportunity.
If you have it, I think it would give you a really good, just a visual of what you can put in there. There's ability to have some of them with 4 different beds, sleeping areas, so that if a family needed it, there's that ability. So I just think that if you have a chance to go over and take a look at it, I think you'd probably really get a really good understanding of the differences that are available.
Most definitely. I'll be looking forward to that. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Other thoughts from council? Peter will have to remind me, remind me because now I can't remember. Sorry, Peter. This is something that can be decided by the executive. However, I don't want to do that. I want council to give direction. And also, if council decides this is a way they'd like to go, of course, we would have a memorandum of understanding with Burlington and all of that. So, we would cover details, of course. So
You're right about that, Mayor. Yeah.
I guess I just throw in that I don't see a sort of a master plan and what this is going to cost for build out, and what proportion we might fit and how services that are going to exist could be utilized by the city. So without that detail, I can certainly live with. We are supportive of the effort going on and want to pitch in on that. It just leaves a bunch of questions for me, but I have no reason not to support this request. It'd be nice to have more information.
I think Mayor Sexton covered a lot of that in his presentation when he visited with us. He was talking about the drug and alcohol services that were going to be available, the helping people find jobs. There was a number of things that he listed. They're talking about having a center there where people can shower, get cleaned up, have mental health counseling, have job assistance, dependency counseling. He listed a number of things. I think it's an ideal situation where people can go, stay, and get the services provided to them that they need. I thought it was pretty clear on what the direction was. He talked around 50 units, which may not cover the entire population of Skagit County, but Anacortes has got their thing going on. Burlington's got theirs now. Mount Vernon is participating in a permanent supportive housing. So there's little bits and pieces that are coming together all over the county to help folks out. We're not going to get it all done in one big fell swoop, but if everybody does a little bit here and there, we're going to take care of the needs that are out there, I believe.
So the capital costs for Pease Road so far are not worked out. The county has committed for 2 up to 3 years of operating funding and has committed, I think, up to $500,000 for construction of the facility. So here we are saying we'll pitch in $120,000, but is that not covered already? How much is the total facility going to cost? So I think it's maybe not looking at the details if we're not asking those questions.
Yeah, Jill, I just wanted to ask, this is more.
Shoot. I think Melissa froze. Um, is there anyone else that has a question? And I'll let her know that she froze. So.
It may help Council Member Beaton if when she speaks, if she turns off her video, it might give her the bandwidth necessary to get her message across or her comments across.
Yeah, well, that's a great suggestion. So we'll watch for her to join back in and ask her to do that. So I know she's been quite frustrated with her connectivity. So, okay. Any other thoughts from council? We can, go on and then come back, of course, to the discussion. Peter, is there, and you'll have to remind me on this one because I can't remember, we have to spend this money by the end of this year. Is that correct?
That's right. I believe it's the end of, or at least have an amendment if we don't.
Okay, just wanted to remember what that timeline was for council as well. So, okay. Why don't we do this? Why don't we go ahead and go on, if there's no other questions at this point, to item B. That is our Development Services Committee update. So I'm going to ask our director, Chris Phillips, to go ahead and take over this part of the meeting.
Well, thank you, Mayor. And I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca right now for the two. We had a very good meeting last night as it related to the Planning Commission and the ICC update for that. So Rebecca will be discussing that, as well as doing a little brief tutorial that we have for our GIS mapping and how she utilizes those services, as well as our public, as they could utilize that too, because these are part of our website. And if the council has any very technical questions, we have Jacob Milner, our lead as our GIS manager on board this evening, that if you have those type of questions, we can go that route. So without further ado, Rebecca Lowell.
Thank you, and good evening, Mayor and City Council. Can everybody see? I've got the screen up just of our city website. All right. Yes. While this is up, I'm going to turn the first part of the presentation over to Jacob Milner, our GIS manager. And while he's giving a brief introduction, I'm going to navigate on our website to the tool that we'll be talking about, just so that if council wants to do the same thing, you can, or after the meeting, you'll know how to get to some of these tools on our website as well. So with that, Jacob, you want to kick it off?
Thank you, Rebecca. Good evening, council. I am the GIS manager within Development Services. I've been with the city since 2018. When the city initially created the GIS division. One of my primary goals has been to improve existing spatial data sets representing features such as addresses, parcels, and street center lines. The Plat Finder application Rebecca will be showing you is an example of the kinds of tools we are able to create with solid, accurate foundational data. So she's kind of navigating through to the Development Services page where our maps are at.
Yes, and I apologize. This is funny. Of course, I never have this issue getting on our city website. But the page is being unresponsive. Doesn't that just figure? So hold on just one second. I'm going to reload some of this here. And so I can see where I'm going here. All right, there we go. There's our city website and our departments. Of course, in our department, Development Services, and I'm going to scroll down to Maps. And once I land on the map page, I'm going to click down here on your Plat Finder interactive web application. And as this opens, I'll turn it back over to Jacob to talk a little bit about why this is created, and then I'll give you a demonstration too when he's done.
So this project was a collaborative effort between the planning and GIS divisions. Our goal was to consolidate development documents for quick retrieval in a user-friendly map-based tool. Some of the value inherent with the tool is it saves time for staff to find these documents and answer questions. Members of the public, such as those within our development community, are able to retrieve these documents on their own at any time. I believe council has already seen the land use application displaying zoning and comprehensive plan information. As our GIS data sets continue to improve, more and more of the static PDF maps on the page Rebecca just showed will be swapped out for more of these dynamic web maps and applications. We're leveraging some exciting emergent GIS technologies here at the city. Looking forward to continuing to develop and release products for the public and staff. The next one on deck, currently we're working to develop a map application to link historical permit and property files. And that'll be in a parcel format. And this will be coming in the next couple of months. With that, Rebecca will walk you through a demonstration from an end user's standpoint of the Plat Finder application.
Perfect. Thank you, Jacob. So once this map opens, historically, I would say probably, even 5 years ago, as planning staff, if we had an application that came in and somebody wanted to do a subdivision or do a building permit, one of the key pieces of information we need is what are the dimensions of the property, and where are the easements and encumbrances? Do they have CC&Rs? There's just a lot of background information that we need from that property. And we had all that data, of course, was stored in multiple different locations. When we get new staff here, I always tell them it took me almost a good decade to get down where all this information was stored. So it's really amazing that it's all in one spot now. And the reason a lot of this information is in different places is because different departments were the keepers of that information. So for example, Public Works is our department that would keep as-built because of course they want to know exactly where utility lines are located, the elevation of those types of items. And then our department would be, we would have copies of the zoning and that type of information. So to find it, you're looking at multiple different sources to pull that all together. So in here, so as you open up this map, you'll see on the right-hand side, it's a really great, I think, user-friendly description of what you can find on this map. Just for, as staff, of course, we zoom right in and are getting right into the nitty-gritty of this. But if somebody didn't know or the public was looking at this map for the first time, they really get a good idea of what they can find and how they find it on this map. So I'm going to zoom in here, and I thought it might be interesting. I'm zooming into Eaglemont. So Eaglemont is this entire square with this funny little exception that's taken out of the middle. That's just always been like that. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit further. And let's say, just for the sake of doing a demonstration, and this would work for any parcel basically that had been platted. This is a piece of property that would be Alpine Fairway Villa Condominiums. And here's what's great about this is that this first link that I'm going to pick is going to take me to the actual subdivision of this property. So this is really one of the primary documents at our department. The first thing that we're going to pull, if we're looking at this piece of property is, and here it is right here, I want to know what the dimensions of it are and where are its easements. And that's important because if somebody was adding on to this building, you can't put a building inside an easement. So it's very important, for example, that we know that there's a water line easement here. And it's great because we've got the footprint of the existing building literally right at our fingertips there. So if I close out of that and scroll down, here are the construction documents that historically have always lived with our Public Works Department. So right here on the far right-hand side of the screen, this is that same piece of property, and I'm going to zoom in you guys can see this better than I can, but so if we were looking at this, what this set of maps is going to tell us is the actual width of the asphalt that serves this property. The rest of the sheets in this plan set are going to tell me where its utilities are stubbed, how large they are, and what their elevations are. So you can see here we've got our sanitary sewer, our storm sewer, water lines, and contour elevation. So it's all really important information that we need when we're looking at a piece of property. And wait, it doesn't stop there. And this is until you've had to pull these all individually, just how incredible this tool is. It really is such a time saver for us. Eaglemont is a planned unit development, and really in its essence, a planned unit development is just a zoning overlay because it puts regulations that are different across a piece of property. And to be able to have this PUD document right at my fingertips instead of having to go dig through boxes is just really great. And the reason I would need this is that there are different setback and development standards specific to PUDs. So when I look at something and it's a PUD, I can't just look at our zoning code to figure out what its setbacks are. You have to go find its PUD documents. So locating these documents has historically can be difficult. And then last but not least, our RCCNRs that are also here. Now, as the city, we don't enforce CCNRs, but they're always really good information for us to have at our fingertips. Because we may, although we wouldn't enforce something, we can inform a property owner. Maybe they would be proposing something that their HOA wouldn't allow. At least we have that document to review, really to see what's going on there. So with that, I could go on and on, but you guys have a long evening. But I thought that just gave a good sample of what this tool does.
So any questions from council? What I think I'm going to ask staff to do is send council a few links to properties that they can play around with on their own. So if you could send a hyperlink,
Sure.
Rebecca or Jacob, that'd be great. And I think what this really illustrates is, I think sometimes the public and developers like to oversimplify the idea of permitting and what staff has to look at and make sure for the benefit of the city we're looking at. And I think this gives a good example of documents that staff looks at every day when they're looking to issue permits and really do their jobs for the public. So any questions for Rebecca or for Jacob?
Mayor, I have one more comment on this is just with public record requests. So today I had a public records request for something similar that all the documents were found here. What would have taken me about probably 2 to 3 hours, as Rebecca said, digging through our electronic database, our variety of servers that we have, as well as maybe taking a ride out to the Public Works buildings where we actually store some of these paper documents to try to locate this. I was done in about 10 minutes because all it was an email, a link, and then being able to take them to this website. So just another use of this tool.
Okay. We are super lucky to have Jacob. He is a GIS genius, so we want to make sure we give him the tools that he needs to do to really consolidate these records. It just hasn't had that effort before. So Jacob, thank you so much for that. And we echo Rebecca's thanks in trying to find things when she needs them. So, okay. Any other questions before we move on?
Nice work. Great investment and good job from staff. Can't wait to use it.
Okay. Chris, go ahead.
So Rebecca, you have the next part up here for the ICC update?
I do.
There we go.
There we go. And hold
So
on.
as I mentioned real quick, last night we were able to provide this to the Planning Commission, spent about a good 45 minutes to an hour with them walking through the various code changes. And Rebecca, as always, was able to sit there and integrate this across all of our code to make sure if there was a change in one section, it goes through the whole code. So without further ado, I'll kick it over to Miss Lowell.
Thank you. So yes, as was stated, we were able to take these code amendments before the Planning Commission last night in a public hearing, and they did make a recommendation that council approve these. So at the earliest, we had hoped to bring these back to City Council next Wednesday, which would be February 24th. But we absolutely recognize that this is a lot to review, and if you wanted to have it at a later date, that's fine, or even postpone that hearing. Although I would say it may look at first blush like there's a lot to cover here. Really what our building official and fire marshal were able to do was to clean up enormous sections of our code. So really what they're, honestly, when it comes right down to it, there's just a lot of things that are being deleted out of both of our building code and our fire code because they just simply don't apply anymore. We had a lot of remnant code that every 3 years we're required to update our building and fire code. And there's just a lot of cleanup that hadn't happened in years past, that now that we've got a new building official and a new fire marshal, they both individuals were able to sit down and really clean up both, which was great. Although then as I was helping them do that, we found that there's always those linkages between codes. So then that led to changes in our procedure codes and our subdivision code. But with that, I thought I'd give you just a brief overview of what is covered in each of the code amendments. So to start with, we've got amendments to both the building and fire code that are required because of the state. It's state law. RCW, I believe it's 1927, requires every 3 years that our building and fire code is updated, and it's not optional. It's one of those items that we are required to adopt that code. So really, that the base code, the international building code, is already in effect. It went into effect on February 1st of 2021. However, like most jurisdictions, we also adopt amendments to that state law. The law says that we can't adopt anything that's less stringent, but we can adopt other amendments, which the city has historically done quite a bit of. But with these updates, a lot of those are historic amendments are really no longer needed because they're already part of the existing state law. So while our building official was updating the building code, he desired to remove a requirement for building permits for what we call minor construction. Things like residential storage sheds that are 200 square feet or smaller, decks that are 30 inches or less above grade, fences that are under 7 feet in height. But that doesn't mean we wouldn't still be requiring a permit. It would just be a planning permit instead of a building permit. And this is something that most jurisdictions in Western Washington have already done. So what we did is we would propose that while there isn't a building permit, we would require a minor site plan permit. And the reason for that is because we want to make sure that even though somebody may not need to get a building permit, we still want to make sure that they're putting their storage shed with the proper setbacks. And the problem that we run into, honestly, more often than that is that we want to make sure that they're not putting these in critical areas or their buffers, because then we run into a whole other set of issues with that. So overall, making that permitting simpler, but I think still being responsible and making sure that we don't get an onslaught of potential code enforcement cases. Go ahead.
So as we go through this, Rebecca, I thought maybe we'll pause between each
Sure.
one if there's any initial thoughts from council. That way we kind of take it one little chunk at a time.
Absolutely.
So I didn't interrupted you too, so I wasn't sure if you were done on that one. Any thoughts from council on that, removing the requirement for building permits for those small items? Okay. Okay. Go ahead, Rebecca. Sorry.
Perfect. Oh, no, you're good. So another item that we looked at was we're really extending and organizing our permit timeframes. So that was one of the reasons that we have amendments to 1405 and actually in our subdivision code as well, is that if somebody wanted to know when a certain type of permit would expire, currently you could literally be looking in 4 or 5 different parts of our code to figure that out. So we've consolidated that into one section, but then at the same time, our building official would like to have the expiration of issued permits. Currently, those permits expire at 180 days or 6 months. What he'd like to do is take that from the 6 months to 2 years with the ability to have an additional 1-year extension. And really what that does, the 3 years is important because that is your typical code cycle. It's every 3 years that the state updates our different building and fire codes. And it really keeps us, hopefully it'll give our staff a little bit of a break from sending out those expiration letters, which are good reminders for folks. But honestly, after 6 months, we almost always just automatically extend it. If somebody's already has a permit and they're working towards it, we want to keep them working. And I think really that serves that well.
Any questions on that one?
No, that just makes good common sense, really. We already do the extensions on these, and there's no sense in having to go through the formality of doing an extension when we can just make the time frame that 3-year period or the 2-year period. That it just makes good sense.
And Mayor, if I can add something in here too, what our building official has done today was a monthly meeting that they have with the county building official and the other larger municipalities here in Skagit and Whatcom County and parts of Northern Island County. What we're doing is actually getting all the codes from all the municipalities with the building officials working together to be in sync. So if a developer goes from one municipality to another, although they have the right to be able to be different for those things that we are in alignment with, this just makes it more streamlined and easy so that hopefully our good council members here don't have to work with or hear from SICPA about us not working with them. We are working very closely to make all that happen. So Mark is working on one end with building officials. I'm working on the other end with the developers.
Okay, we'll go on to the next one.
All right, and similarly, a TCO is a temporary certificate of occupancy. We issue those for non-residential permits when somebody is close to being ready to be done, but they want to start moving in or maybe selling one of their multifamily units. We only issue a TCO when all your life safety requirements are in. Right now, the time frame for those is 30 days, and we'd like to move it from 30 to 180 days. Again, what ends up happening is that we just end up issuing a new TCO after, we usually end up issuing several when we know that they generally need more time than that. So I think that's a nice cleanup as well.
Any questions on that one? Okay, great.
And then last but not least, we just already said the removal of a lot of code that's no longer applicable. With our fire codes, we're moving from our building code into our fire code, really very similar amendments. So instead of the International Building Code, we've got the International Fire Code that's adopted into Chapter 1508. And again, just a removal of a lot of code that's no longer applicable. Here was an example of emergency responder radio coverage. We had pages and pages in our code that covers this. It's no longer needed because that code is now just already adopted into the 2018 IBC. So there's no need to have that in both places. We're also proposing the same permit extensions for our fire permits as we would our building permits. And then then we've got some clarifications. Some of the we had some address number specifications that needed to be cleaned up, sort of those types of things. And then more substantively, we had, although it's really just I think a service to our applicants, we're making sure that our fire permits will now be included in Chapter 1405 with a list of the type of fire permits that we issue and all of their submittal requirements. Currently, you would have to go into the International Fire Code to figure out exactly which permits are required. So I think that's just a nice service to the public to be able to look in that one chapter of the code to figure out all of those things for between whether it's a building permit, a fire permit, an engineering permit, or a planning permit.
Any questions for Rebecca on that? Great. We're really benefiting from Barry, our fire marshal, on working through this code work as well. So, okay. All right.
Yes, and I'll say, and he is great to work with. Moving into Chapter 1405 again, which is our procedures code. We've got our fire permits, as I just mentioned, and their associated submittals will now be located also instead of just relying on the fire code. We did have to add an administrative planning permit. So when we took away the building permit for the those certain minor improvements, to offset that, we've got this administrative planning permit to make sure that we're looking at setbacks and location of these minor types of improvements. Similar to, since the building and fire code, they were looking at all their timeframes, I really took a comprehensive look at what all of our expiration timeframes were, including our planning permits. And there was one time frame that we have now that I would like to move from 30 days to 90 days. And that's when when an applicant's been asked to resubmit something to us. Currently, we give them a 30-day time frame in which to respond, and we'd like to move that to 90 days.
Okay. Any questions on that? Okay.
All right. While I was going through our procedures code, I found, and I thought it was sort of interesting. We actually, our current electronic signature requirements that we have in our code we have federal and state laws that have changed to make electronic signatures easier and more user-friendly. So we want to make sure that our code matches what is allowed federally and by state laws. So we've got some amendments there. And then last but not least on this item, historically in Chapter 1405, we had two tables of permits. We had our building permits and all of their submittal requirements and everything else. And the table that had everything else started out as a portrait-sized table, and then I turned it to a landscape. And now it's an 11 by 17 landscape, which in and of itself isn't, all the information is there and it's correct, but it's hard for people to be able to scroll over and to see which submittal requirements are required. And so I know if I have trouble doing it, and I formatted them, so I pretty much know where things are, I know it's got to be difficult for applicants when they're doing that. So really I took that great big spreadsheet and I just separated it out into 5 different spreadsheets that would all be codified, just really to make that more user-friendly for folks who are looking through that.
Any questions for Rebecca on that one? Okay.
All right, we're almost done. With our subdivision codes, while we were looking at our expirations, what I found was that we had subdivision expirations that were no longer applicable. We had several sets of regulations that were left over from our last recession where items had been extended. We don't have any more of those applications. They're all, none of the timing makes any sense anymore. We're well past it. And so just to clean that up, I'm suggesting that we just delete it out of there. It wouldn't apply to anything anyway. And instead, I'm just removing that and referring it straight back to state law, which is what it really should be right now.
Okay.
And
Go.
then under the floodplain development, this one was adding a requirement for outdoor machinery and equipment. Also needs to be elevated if you're in a floodplain. If you've got like the example of this would be HVAC equipment, or if you've got a heat pump that you've got located outside of a building or residential structure. FEMA requires that heat pump be elevated the same way that a house would, because if you think about it, if you have a house that's flooding, you're going to have your mechanical equipment flooded as well. So this is something that we've been enforcing and requiring, but we needed to clean up in our code. This is something that FEMA representatives informed us about several months ago, that before they come back for, what do they call it? They call it a community assistance visit. In other words, it's an audit. But they make it sound nicer than that. They look through all of our codes and they pull certain permits that we have. And the reason that it's so important that we score well is because the score that we receive affects the insurance rates of all of our property owners that get flood insurance. So it really is, when FEMA asks us to clean something up, we do so generally as quickly as we can, just to make sure that we aren't affecting people's flood insurance rates.
Okay. Any questions about that slide? Okay, so Rebecca, our next steps then, or is there one more?
Sorry, yeah, there's just one more.
That's okay.
So I know earlier in the year, we had talked about doing a comprehensive overhaul of our fee schedule. And this is not that. These are just a handful of fees that both our building code and our fire code actually have fee schedules that are embedded within them. So it really made sense while I was looking through those to say, you know, let's just throw it out there. These are 4 items that I think would be beneficial to have updated if council is willing to do that, or we could just do this later in the year as well. So the first one was currently we have our hourly fees are at $75. We'd like to change that to $125 to actually capture the overhead and of what it really costs our staff to do these. When we have hourly, we only have a handful of permits that rely on hourly fees, but when we do, we thought that would be a good change. This next one for pre-app meetings, this was actually something that we had discussed. And Chris might need to help me with this. It was at least a year ago when we did our last big update.
Yeah, this was like 2.5 years ago when we brought this up, as we were looking at the fee structures and the as we were going online and everything going to the the web or the cloud. I'm sorry, and doing that this was one of the things that we had discussed back then.
Yes, and so what happened was that we had discussed this with council. You gave us the head nod to go ahead and do this, but then when I was drafting the ordinance, I didn't get it added in there at that time. So it would be great to be able to pick this up, and just because 2.5 years, the time flies. So really, and what this was proposed is that this $500 fee wouldn't be assessed when somebody contacts us and wants to come in for a pre-app. It would be assessed when they actually submit their application. So we were, it was sort of that, and Chris, you might need to help me with this too, but because it has been a while, but really we wanted to not discourage people from submitting pre-apps, because they are really a valuable way to make sure that we've got people on track when they're starting their project. But there is a considerable amount of staff time and effort that goes into these, and it would be nice to capture just a portion of that back when something's submitted.
You hit a home run there, Rebecca. That
Okay.
was it. And the fee that I was going to talk about that we did about two and a half years ago was the tech fee, which basically we put on a variety of all the permits that were there. There is a fee structure that goes along with it and basically pays for the SmartGov system on an annual basis. So that's basically what we're looking at there.
Perfect.
Any questions from council on that?
Yeah, I got one.
Go ahead, Gary.
When what did kind of refresh our memory on some of this since it's been a while. How did we on the hourly rate with other cities around us and maybe the county?
Yeah.
We're low, but I'll let Chris, I think you've got a spreadsheet of that.
So yeah, the spreadsheet of the information here, but Councilmember Molinar, we are very, very low in a sense that we haven't updated this particular fee in close to 6 to 8 years. In relationship to the other municipalities, they are in dire need to update theirs as well. This keeps us basically below the county, but above the mean of the remaining municipalities in the county. But the county is a pay for play, and their hourly rate is much higher. As Rebecca talked about too, this only addresses like a handful of fairly complex permits that you would have. Most of the other ones that we have in there are at a much lower rate.
And how many of the cities are doing SmartGov?
Just us and
okay.
Yeah, just us in Island County right now that I'm aware of. I've had feelers from Cedar-Woolley and the county, and that's been about it.
Okay. Because I think we definitely have to recoup our fees if we're, if it's going back to the SmartGov payment. So.
Yeah, and this is, another comparison could be the private sector. If you're looking at someone who does planning work or does civil engineering work, that would be Alan's work, or the building official. And there's again a comparison out in the private sector. This is well below that particular aspect. So like when we're looking at contracting out with folks, their rates are much higher than ours. I think this is a reasonable amount. This is, again, if we were going to go and do the county's methodology, that would probably be somewhere around the 175, possibly 200 on the hourly rate there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
One thing too on the pre-apps, I think what this will help is, and council, may know that those pre-apps are a significant amount of staff in the room. A lot of times the PUD will join. The report that's generated back is a significant amount of information. And what we really want to try and avoid is sort of pre-apps where people are using the city as their consultants. That is not appropriate. And so I think this will be a good way to ensure that folks are coming prepared for a pre-app with what they need to be bringing in order to make good use of all that time. So, okay.
All right. So the next charge that we have here is, and this is an interesting one, we don't have a permit fee for the floodplain development permits that we issue. So what we're suggesting is that when we have a floodplain development permit that has no elevation certificate, so it's a not as much paperwork that we have to report back to FEMA, there would be a $100 permit fee, but when there is an elevation certificate, it would be a $250 fee. And I would say, when I say an elevation certificate, there's actually 3 elevation certificates that occur on these types of properties. So the first one is provided to us before construction starts, because we have to make sure that the existing grade is where it needs to be. And then after the foundation is poured, a surveyor goes back out to the site, and you get your second elevation certificate. And then you get a third one once the finished floor is in. So there is a considerable amount of effort and time that goes into making sure that our elevation certificates are correct. And again, this is one of the items that when FEMA comes and pays us a visit, this is what they pull mostly. They want to look at our elevation certificates and make sure that they are filled out correctly and that we as the city are getting all the information that we should. Okay. And then last but not least, the fire fees. And I gotta say, I was so happy that our new Fire Marshal Barry actually tackled this because I'll tell you, I actually I had programmed our SmartGov program to calculate our current fire fees. And it was the most difficult set of fee schedules, and it really should not be. It is not that difficult, but the way that those fees are laid out are extremely difficult for an applicant to be able to look at it. And really, if somebody's thinking they're trying to get a good idea of what it's going to cost to, let's say, install a sprinkler system, it should be pretty easy to ballpark what their permit fee would be. And I'll tell you, it's not with our current fee schedule. So Barry went through the fee schedule and he took a lot of averages of those to really make it much simpler to not only administer those fees, but also just to convey that information to the public so they know approximately what they would be paying. Of course, we can give them estimates as well, but a lot of folks like to be able to just look at the code, and you should be able to look at it and within reason figure out what you're going to be charged. So I think he did a really good job with simplifying that fee structure for everyone.
Okay. Is that
that is
the last one? So what is our next steps then on moving through this process?
So if it's all right with council, I am prepared to bring the ordinance and have a public hearing before you on the 24th. And if at that time you want to postpone to another date, we can certainly do that. But we're good to go if it's with your blessing.
I had one question, and it's more out of curiosity than anything else. Has any of our user groups weighed in on these changes? I know there's been a lot of work done, looks like a lot of changes in the positive, and I'm just wondering if any of the user groups have weighed in yet.
I haven't heard anything.
So I can help you out there, Rebecca.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so Councilmember Holst, where I'm kind of looped in with that is on a few levels. On the one level is with the building officials group that I talked about. So it's Whatcom, Skagit, and Northern Island County, all the building officials going on with that. I also reached out to SICPA because as the governor was putting out on the 1st of February that this was going into effect, you would imagine it had shock waves through all facets, the municipal government side of the house, as well as the development side of the house. So I was contacting Wayne as it related to that, Wayne Kreider over there. He reached out to his group that he represents to see if they wanted to get together with our fire marshal and building official just to kind of walk through the changes as we saw them. That wasn't desired. They felt fairly comfortable with the information that was being provided to them. And then when we had this information in there as to changes or the recommended changes that were in there, that was again discussed with Wayne and the group. Building official offered, and we just kind of went from there.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So Rebecca, if we were to have this on an agenda next week for a public hearing, would council expect then to have sort of like a red line version of all these different things provided in their packet?
You would, and I've done a whole, like I normally do, the redlined with a strike through if it's being deleted and an underline if it's being added. And I'm only providing more information than you probably need with answering this, but only to say that this looks like a scary document when you get it because it's about 90 pages. but really when you look through it and look to see what's in there, it's not as bad as it looks. The planning commission, we were chatting about that last night too, because I really kept telling him, just look at the red. If it's not red, it's existing code and we're not doing anything to it. It's just that when we write those ordinances, if we're changing just one little bit in a subsection, we have to put the whole thing in. So you end up with a document that looks really big when it's really not.
Okay. So if council's okay, again, it's not that you would have to take action next week if you are not comfortable, but maybe to get the process rolling, we'll have our public hearing for next week, and that way that's done, and then we can go from there. Does that sound like a plan for council?
Sounds good to me.
Same here. I'd like to say thank you for all the hard work. That's a lot of work that has been presented, and I appreciate very much all the time that was put into it.
Okay. Yes, Rebecca is the subject matter expert on code and what our existing code is. So we couldn't do it without her, and having her put her arms around all of the changes comprehensively for everybody is great. So thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Okay. Great. Chris, is there, where'd you go? There you are. Just those two items, correct?
Sorry about that, boss. I was still there. I was jumping ahead. I was like, oh, okay. Hey, I'm off the sheet. No, everything there is good. The one thing again with this ICC code that most of the developers, if they were going to come and talk to you about, and it's not the city, it's at the international level, was just the energy code. So a lot of the energy code that has changed is really the I guess the benefit of why we saw this huge amount of building permits coming in before the 1st of February was to circumnavigate that particular requirement because it's fairly expensive.
All right. So, Council, how about if we go back up to wrap up our discussion on the CDBG CV3 funds? Councilmember Beaton is back. I didn't want to move on without her being able to finish her question. So, Melissa, if you're there, do you want to try and pick up where you left off there?
Well, hello, I'm back.
Hello.
I just wanted to make sure this is just at the moment, it's just us council earmarking these funds for future use if the project goes through, correct?
Mm-hmm. You could, that would be a good characterization, sure.
Okay. Thank you very much.
And after we get ducks in a row and a memorandum and all that stuff. So,
okay.
Thank you. Yeah, we just want to get moving on some of the different agreements and details. We just kind of need council to give us some direction for that. So, okay. Anything back up on the CV3 funds before we go to item C? Okay, great. Thank you. So item C is for the good of the order, and you may have realized that we had a guest with us tonight. So if council's okay, if we could go ahead and talk through our equity workshops agenda items so that our guest doesn't have to stay on much longer with us. Is that okay with the council? Okay, great. So I wanted to welcome Ms. Yadira Rosales. She is the Associate Vice President for Equity and Inclusion. She's the Interim Dean for Basic Education for Adults. I believe Councilmember Brocksmith had invited her to join us for this discussion. So I will hand it over to our council members who are part of our a small committee. So not sure if I pass it to Richard.
Well, thank you. And I think, Iris, do you want to start us off? Or would you like me to? Go ahead.
Yes, good evening. Okay. Good evening, councilors and colleagues. We would like to present Yadira Rosales, who's part of the Sky Valley College. She's been an educator and been part of the counseling students, and she's part of the is a leader in the community. And we invite her with she and Claudia Bendaño but Claudia couldn't make it today because she's in classes, I think. That's why she couldn't make it. And we would like to let her talk about this project. It's a great project for the community. I think it's very important for us to, I'm sorry, it's important for the community to, I don't know what happened with the camera. I don't know.
We can hear you.
I don't know what happened. It's
Iris, go ahead and speak. I think when your video is on, it actually
anyway,
slows down your
then
connection.
I think this is something is very important for the community to know. Okay, for the community. Oh, okay. I don't know. It's but what I was saying is we all of us with loop talking and see this is very important for our community to know about equity and inclusion and that's what we would like to ask Yadira to come up with the what is exactly the project is going to be like. Thank
Great.
you, Yadira, for joining us.
Yes.
And
Great, thank
really
you.
honored to have you over. Thank you.
No, thank you so much for inviting me. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I have found the last hour very interesting. So actually it wasn't a waste of my time. But also, of course, my son, who's 3 years old, decided to show up now. So excuse any noise you may hear or crying or anything like that. Yes, I've been working at Skagit Valley College since 2012. I'm a graduate of Skagit Valley College and also a graduate of Mount Vernon High School. So it's always been my goal to serve my community in as many ways as I can. And I think what's really important about this work is that as we have all witnessed, there has been a great deal of discussion and conversation nationally and regionally and even locally about the social unrest, as well as the opportunities to reflect on inclusion and access to equal opportunities for our community. And so that means to me that we need to open the doors of access and opportunity for everyone. How can we continue to build an inclusive community where everybody feels they belong? Where do we continue to provide that high quality education, the healthcare, by promoting economic, educational, and workplace opportunities for all of our community members? So that's why these conversations are just really important. But mainly, I think important to the safety and the security of the folks that live in our community. So that's why I'm really excited about this project, because it's a proposal between the City of Mount Vernon and Skagit Valley College to propose to host and facilitate community-wide conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're all coming with different backgrounds and with different knowledge. And one of the priorities of Skagit Valley College is how do we continue to be part of that learning in our community? We don't have the answers. We are not all experts, but how can, as a community, can we continue to grow and foster a safe and inclusive community for all? So that's why this project is really exciting, and I'm really thankful for the invitation today. And thank you so much for the time to speak with you today.
Okay.
Thank you, Yadira.
Richard, or I know Juan maybe just joined this week, so it's definitely a council-driven topic. So I'll turn it over to you.
Well, there's a one pager in your packet which kind of lays out really the proposed approach to a workshop. We have been meeting for a few months and kind of looking at different models about what would be helpful in the community, and different groups have done just listening sessions, and that is important, but we also looked at sort of general public type workshops that could be hosted, but it's sort of difficult to really get down into some of the detail and have some meaningful discussion without a smaller group of folks. And so what we've proposed here, which is an open discussion really still, is this idea of having sort of a facilitated program delivery and workshops with a dedicated group of say 15 to 20 folks. That's about what you can handle on Zoom, and we're going to have to do this, remotely now, unfortunately, for a while. And that these would be a sort of a committed set of individuals who are sort of organizational representatives, people who have other circles of influence back at their organizations, who can bring information to the conversation and then can also take information back to their organizations to support their own, journey, whether that's individual or organizational, evolution. So this is really just a set of conversations to listen to one another, to build resources. So we anticipate that there would be websites with information, presentation materials, reference materials, that we could be resources for one another and to connect to the broader community, sort of train the trainer, but really start to move out in circles as we get a little further down the road. I have heard that there's, we have limited budgets in the city, and I have heard that there's some concern about what our financial contributions would be. And we did put a rough estimate in the proposal. We've asked Skagit Valley College, who has spent several years pulling together their own information and programs that they could provide. They're the experts in it, not us, and so that made sense for them to deliver that. And it's great that they've worked with their leadership to say, yes, this is something we're interested in. We put a rough estimate of what it'd take to pay for that, but right now I think we're just in the listening stage to see what your thoughts are on it. And we are planning to go out to the Community Foundation to raise funding. We've just now started really sharing this proposal with some other groups, and I'm happy to report that there are some other governments who are interested, and nonprofit organizations who could help us raise some funds and would participate. So we're really just at the beginning stages. So those are just a few details I wanted to add in, and maybe some context to set with the group. There's really no, I guess, agenda or perception of where this is going. It's more of a conversation to get us started and provide information to folks. That's where we are.
Okay. Richard, maybe I would ask you, I had heard that there's possibly some other organizations working on some of this type of idea, but I haven't heard lately. So I knew that EDASC was thinking, and the chambers maybe, but I don't know if you have any information on other groups that are looking at something along these lines. Is Richard frozen now too? We are having a tough time tonight. Okay. Well, maybe, Yadira, do you know of any other groups that are looking at this? Maybe you could help us.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, if I may,
Thank you.
if I may provide a response. Yes, so Skagit Valley College is actually securing a contract with Port of Skagit to provide training year round, every other month for their employees. But we also have, and I'm knowledgeable of the work that Dr. Keegan is doing with EDASC in terms of building a task force within EDASC to speak on diversity and equity and inclusion topics, and also recommendations.
Okay, thank you so much. I figured there's got to be more to that. Okay, thoughts from council? Actually, Richard's coming back, so.
Oh, I'm so
There he
sorry.
is,
Just
so.
as you asked me a question, I fell off.
Okay.
But you were saying you have heard some other organizations that might be doing something similar. Maybe you're asking, how do we complement that or support that?
Yadira helped us. She had mentioned EDASC was working on it, and as Port of Skagit, so.
Yeah, and I've talked with John about it. I'm not sure what their most recent plans are, but it does sound like this would be complementary to that. And I think that's another question that we need to follow up on.
I guess if there's no other questions, I would ask maybe who do you see the audience being on this?
Well, I'm not sure if audience maybe is the right word as maybe participants. So we've structured it as 15 to 20 sort of organizational representatives. So sort of building a support network that way. And the listed in the one page are potential partners: EDASC and Community Foundation, United Way, Community Action Skagit County, the school district, Skagit County, tribes, hospital districts, law enforcement or justice systems, other cities in the county. And then maybe a few general public members as well, depending on how that fleshes out to 15 or 20.
So that was my question then, Richard, was basically you're looking at this group of organizations to pull a representative from and add some community figures, and that would be your core group of who you want to facilitate these with. Right? Am I right on that? If I get
Yes,
to there?
you're right. And Yadira, Iris, jump in here if you want to. That you know, we really talked about how we could do this like a sort of a public feed sort of thing, and you know, there's some limitations when you have sort of streamed workshops, and so we felt like it might be more beneficial if we had that set number of folks to start with, rather than a public workshop setting.
Yeah, and I would add that we also spoke to the sustainability aspect of the project, because we know that if we're able to reach out to more organizations, then that message will carry through, and the continued work will continue to happen in those workplaces or organizations. And so we wanted to be able to cover more ground in terms of the content and the facilitation.
If I could add just another suggestion is, I think it would be important for you to have someone from the agricultural community involved. That's and I'm looking through the list, I don't see anybody specifically, so that's just a thought.
Yeah, I think, yeah, SDAX is related to the agriculture field, EDASC. And we have also, we would like to have a part of the migrant farm workers and students from the high school. It would be something good for the community to listen those groups. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to admit that I was a little confused then. I think I had assumed that our library would be hosting this and it would be like a programming through the library for the public. And so I apologize, because I think that's in some of the answering questions from some council members, I think I probably couched that like that. And I think when I saw the partners, I assumed funding partners. So.
There may be pieces that we can record and use for programming. So we certainly be looking for some efficiency in that regard. And I think we are hopeful that those folks who are listed as partners could potentially help with funding as well. So for instance, had a conversation today with representatives from the Skagit Regional Health who are looking to do something similar, and also with the Community Action Board of Directors. So those are still avenues we're pursuing as well.
So I guess I'm just kind of wondering here, this is all new to at least to me. It hasn't been something we've discussed on council before. What's the end goal in this?
The end goal. So I guess success would be a series of resources and reference materials, as well as you know, set of 15 to 20 organizations who have some sort of common definitions and dialogue and understanding of information that might be able to help each of those organizations and our constituents in the city, as we're sort of all in different places on a sort of journey to look at policies and procedures and bring people in. So Yadira, do you want to augment that, your vision of success or outcomes?
Yeah, I would add that to the work that we've been doing in Skagit since 2012 when Dr. Keegan first became president. The question was about how do we provide access and achievement to our students to make sure that not only are they coming to college, but that they can graduate and that their graduation rate is not based on their race or their gender. And so with that example, I turn it to what are the different organizations that we have in our county, in our community, that can support the access of our community members to make sure that they get the best healthcare, that they get the best workplace opportunities, that they get the best high quality education. And what are those conversations that we need to be having as leaders in the community, within leaders of that organization, to make sure that we're providing all those opportunities to anybody who may walk in through that door.
Let's see. So just want to jump in very quickly. If I'm understanding this correctly, and I hope I am, if I'm not, feel free to realign me here. But it sounds like these workshops are an opportunity for education. That's what it really comes down to. It's what it seems. Sort of going back to class, picking up a thing or two with the hopes of taking those learning targets and placing them back into the community through, I guess, the vessels of the 15 to 20 organizational representatives that are already embedded in the community, right?
Correct. And I would add, when we look into the research in terms of the rates, whether that may be in whatever institution we're talking about in our community, we see disproportionate rates based on gender and race. And so what is the conversation that as leaders we should be having or should be informed about?
Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to understand what the message is. I'm still kind of confused here as to what's the message. What are we trying to accomplish? There's got to be a message here. There's something that we're trying to communicate to the public or to organizations. What is that?
If I may, so the understanding that I've gotten here, and from what I've seen and from what I've heard, equity has been the newer term that should have been replacing equality, right? So they're two different things, although we might tend to view equity and equality as one and the same, but really they are not. I saw a diagram or a picture, an illustration before in the past, where they compare the two, and it's compared through fences, right? I'm not sure if some of you have seen this, but the equality fence would be a fence that's at the same height for everybody, regardless of your height. If you're 5'10", 7 foot or so, 6'5" or whatever, and the equality is more of a proportional one, proportional to that individual's height or to their stance, if they have any bricks underneath their feet or something. So with that in mind, you mentioned, I think Ms. Rosales mentioned, like in healthcare, how could it be more equitable in healthcare? I recently learned that there's a mortality gap in the healthcare system. I'm not saying it's here locally, but nationally there is a mortality gap. And basically what that comes down to is certain members of certain communities have a higher mortality, not based because of the illness or disease at hand, but because of other factors such as race or age things
Mhm.
like that. So when it's a really good question that Council Member Holst is making. What would be the end goal out of these educational workshops? From what I'm hearing, it sounds like it would be towards putting a spotlight at those things, such as the mortality gap in healthcare systems, right? Feel free to jump in, Mr. Salas. At least that's what I'm understanding.
Absolutely, Juan. Yes, you're right. This is it's like a giving the opportunity to community to understand on being educated in these kind of topics. Is giving the the tools for the community feel welcome in the community with the citizens and the government, the local government. It's like for us a city council is to bring the community in one loop and in the table and let them. We want to hear from them. How do they feel? What is the barriers they been facing in the community for in healthcare and education and employment opportunities and being inclusive in the community. And I think it's for us as local government.
Oh, shoot. I think we lost Iris. Okay.
My position, I have seen many of the families. They feel struggling in healthcare. For example, it's a big example. With the COVID being exposed, people they are so afraid to attend to the doctor because they don't have the same opportunities or the same rights like everybody else has medical insurance. And for us to bring up this kind of workshop is to put it on the table and hear the community. This is one of the purpose of this workshop to let the community and our members to and what is the importance about these workshops. And if we talk about education, it's great to hear about our students. Those students they are already ready to graduate from high school and applying for college. But sometimes we have seen the students speak what they how they've been through in the system and the education system until they're gone, after they are away, when they don't have anybody else around, like teachers, counselors, parents, community members. Why we have to wait until they're gone to hear they were suffering that kind of inclusion and equality, like Juan was talking about.
Smith is the funding. The city has very limited funding. And so, especially if this is going to be primarily for people from other organizations, that would be my ask, is to go back and see where there's contributions, to pay for this. That would be my suggestion. Is there any other suggestion from council for the group to take back?
I definitely agree with you on the funding side of things. The Skagit Valley College has a foundation. There may be some funding available through that. There's other organizations that may have some funding available. But for me, I'd need a clearer picture of what we're trying to accomplish, and maybe some examples of where inequity is taking place. Sitting on the council, when we make decisions on the council, we make decisions that's in the best interest of the entire community. We don't pick out one group over another. We look at what's in the best interest of the whole community. And I'd like to see, some examples of where the inequity is.
Would that be in city services, Mark? Because I think like we as the council and mayor deal with city services.
Correct,
or
yeah.
are you looking at, okay.
No, I mean, we're bringing this to city council. This is city council business, and I'd just like to see where the inequities are within the city government.
Okay. Okay.
And have we already done things to address some of these issues as far as our policies in the city?
Okay.
And I would add, as you're sharing that actually is what creates the curriculum for the training. So putting on the table, what are those inequities? What are those examples? That's what the training is about. It's about having that conversation because we are all in different places in terms of our understanding of equity and inclusion. And I understand that is for many a topic that we haven't discussed because it's not something that we tend to discuss, whether that may be in education or within our family. Our lived experience has a lot to do with the conversations that we're having. And so as you were sharing, that's part of the curriculum that we're building and those are the questions that we're answering within the training.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Definitely, smaller groups or talking with each other as council members, that'll be key in moving forward as well. So, okay. Well, thank you, Yadira, for joining us this evening and spending your time on an evening. Go take care of that little one. And I appreciate your time and joining us. Thank you so much. Okay. All right, then. Going back to the consent agenda discussion that's under for the good of the order. This was a request to discuss from Councilmember Brocksmith. So we did include some examples from other jurisdictions. So Richard, maybe I'll have you lead the concerns and how you wanted to bring this up.
Well, we had a conversation, the mayor and I, about the consent agenda and how it's formed. And, I think it was a week or two ago that we, had, I think it was 9 contracts from the Development Services Department come forward. These were each and every one of them repeat contracts for services that were approved in a budget by contractors who are repeat contractors for the same types of services we've seen before. And it seems like there may be a more efficient use of our time. And when I started looking around, and then Mayor showed me a couple other examples. For instance, Skagit County, where these contracts are listed in a consent agenda. All the information one sees already is available generally to be looked at and reviewed ahead of the meetings. And if there's some question or discussion necessary, then they're pulled off of the consent agenda and they're discussed in the regular agenda. So we did talk about this a few months ago. I know Councilmember Holst really suggested that it was set up that way so that we could look at each one of these. And so I appreciate that that there is some value in doing that. But I do think the consent agenda allows us that opportunity and would free up some time to focus on maybe some other topics, dig a little bit deeper in the regular agenda topics. So I guess that's just the background and the recognition that, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but is there some way to streamline that and save some time?
So with all due respect, Richard, or Councilman Brocksmith, you didn't finish my thought. I said it was set up this way. It was set up this way so that we could review these items, but also for transparency for the general public. And that's the part that I think is important, is the transparency to the public. If we put these things on a consent agenda, where's the transparency? So we look at, we had 8, 9 items. It took us 8 or 9 minutes to get through it. we've had more discussions probably about the consent agenda than we spent on those items. So for me, I was okay when we moved our payroll. That's just a monthly or a bi-monthly process. And I was okay when we put our minutes on. Our minutes are posted everywhere. I was fine when we put those on the consent agenda, but to take day-to-day business that council's making decisions on, I think that needs to be transparent. The public needs to see it and hear those conversations and the debate back and forth. Sometimes there is no debate. Sometimes there's questions that do need to be answered, and I think the public has the right to see that.
Other thoughts?
I would say that when I first came on the council, we had to approve everything, minutes, payroll, bills, all together. I mean, separately, we did them all. And so that was one of my requests was can we do a consent agenda, at least just for that portion? So the council agreed to do that. So I'm quite happy with that. At least we consolidated something. I hear what Mark's saying about it. Yes, we whipped through those very quickly last week. And I hope people didn't think we were being, I don't know what the right word is, but it's hard to do these things when you're not sitting next to each other because we can read each other in a room. But we went through them pretty fast, and so there's I don't think that there's any problem with us actually just talking it. If there's a question, obviously it's there. I'm fine with the way we do it now. I think it's good for us to have those individual items on our agenda.
And just so the public knows, I know Mary said we whipped through it and it's hard for us to see each other. Just so the public knows, we have all this information. Usually we have our packets on a Thursday or Friday, and we're able to go through this, review it all, and then prepare our questions for staff if we have any. We're not just rubber stamping everything that goes through. There is a process that we as council members go through to review the information that's given to us. If it's a egregious question that we have or something that we're very concerned about, we may call the department head prior to the council meeting. If it's minor issues, we may just make those clarifications during the council meeting. And if there's no objection from any of the council members, we go ahead and pass what we've already reviewed.
Hello, I'm back. Hopefully I'm still going to be here for a while. Yeah, I have to agree with both Councilmember Holst and Hudson. I serve on a statewide committee for the public trust and confidence in government. And, you know, some of these entering these contracts are standard sometimes, but it's city business, and it lets our public know what we're doing, where their tax funds are going, where their tax money is going. And I've had people reach out and ask about that. And so I think it's important that we are as open and transparent as possible. Yeah, so that's where I stand.
In looking at it too, when you start to move down that road, like Mark said, you know, these things have already been budgeted, so it's comes out as more of a formality. But if it just goes into, like, let's just say if we did contracts under $25,000 go on a consent agenda, but if when you run into this issue where that, you know, maybe there was a cost overrun, well, then does it still get thrown on the consent agenda? And then we may not know about that, and if it just got thrown on there. So I'd be fine just keeping it the way it is, unless we could break it down to where it's under 10 or under $25,000, and if there are cost overruns, then it needs to come back to council, that we would know that.
I believe what Council Molinar is referring to is we have kind of a councilman policy that staff or the mayor is authorized to spend up to $10,000 without, or entering into up to a $10,000 agreement without coming before council. Anything at 10,000 and above, the executive needs the authorization of the council to enter into. If I understand correctly, that $10,000 limit's been there for years. Kevin, how long have you been with us?
Prosecutor 2002, but city attorney when I knew about this particular stuff 2004, and it's been there since then.
So we're coming up on 20 years without any kind of an increase for inflation on that particular policy. So it might be something that council wants to review as a policy, maybe along with some other things within our council policy, and have that discussion on whether we raise that limit so it's not quite so cumbersome.
And Doug is here. We had thought of something like that. And so he's done a little bit of trying to pull a little data for us to sort of kind of frame this discussion. So Doug, if you just want to share a few minutes of what you've kind of been looking at in the last day.
Sure, absolutely. Hello, everybody. One of the things actually back in 2019, we actually worked with all the cities around here on looking at purchasing policies and gathering information. I have information from about 15 different entities here of what they are. And at the time, the city of Mount Vernon and Anacortes were the only ones that had that $10,000 threshold. The rest of them are all much, much higher. I mean, they go anywhere from, well, Anacortes they approved theirs at $45,000. And then they go all the way up to $200,000 and $300,000, depending on which. I mean, that's Spokane County. That's a larger county. But for supplies, equipment, materials, and services, it's $50,000, and that's what we're looking at. Most of the places and what they are right now is around that $50,000 mark. So for supplies, equipment, material, and services. So one of the things that I'd like to do is work on, not right away, but work on an updated purchasing policy for the city of Mount Vernon. But in the meantime, if we can just bring forward something for you to look at it, just as far as the that aspect of it for the approval amounts, maybe we can bring that forward and have you guys look at that and see what you think.
So Doug, I've got a couple questions on that. So that $45,000 that Anacortes set, is that correct? Was Anacortes that set 45,000?
Yes.
That's for budgeted items, budgeted item purchases, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
That wouldn't be for professional service contracts or anything like that, would it?
It is for service contracts. Yes. And most of it is, that's usually the professional services, our service contracts have the lowest amount. When I'm talking about 50s, 75, that's when it starts getting into the other thing, but the lowest one is usually the services.
What percentage of our contracts, like in a given year, would meet the criteria to, if you took that threshold?
I tried to
guesstimate.
That's a very good question. I wanted to find that out today. We approved about 140 contracts last year, and I don't have a way of actually, unless I go through every one of them and looked, and I just didn't get to that today.
Yeah, that's fine.
So I would assume that, you know, if you're talking between $10,000 and $50,000, there's a lot of those contracts. I wouldn't think there's a huge difference in there. I mean, I think it just makes a lot of sense to increase that rate or that amount. And we're like, as far as I can see, like I had 15 that I looked at right here, and I didn't cherry pick them. These are just ones that we got and collected with the other cities, and we are the lowest one on there. So,
yeah. I'm looking at this from a couple standpoints. One, is kind of nice to know when we enter into those professional service contracts. So I'm not quite sure how we address that. On the other side of the coin, we do have a bunch of budgeted items that are we've already had these discussions during the budget process. We should have asked those questions during that time. We've put it into the budget. We've told the executive that it's okay to spend these dollars. It's kind of silly to come back to council and say, geez, we need to buy a $10,000 or $11,000 copy machine. Is it okay if I enter into that agreement with whoever the copy machine is when we've already authorized it 2 months before in the budget? So I think there's some give and take that we can find here. As far as our professional service contracts, I think we can develop some kind of a policy to make it easier for the executive and for the staff to enter into those with some sort of just notification to council. Does that make sense?
It does. I think if we look at updating purchasing policies and include something like this, it's automatically going to, take some things off the agenda for sure. But I feel like it's just kind of an introduction of these ideas tonight. And if council's interested, Doug will work on, he wants to update those purchasing policies, and this certainly would be part of that. And so we would be bringing back ideas to council in that comprehensive look of purchasing.
And Doug, if you want to take that from 10,000 to 12.5, I'm good. We can do that next week.
Wow, he's so generous, so generous, Mark. I like the idea of looking at that, so I would certainly be in favor of you doing that. And I, as chairman of the finance committee, maybe we can discuss it together.
That would be great. That would be great.
Good.
So from what I'm hearing is, consent agenda, sort of leave it as it is. However, modifying our purchasing policies is a way that actually affects that as well, affects agendas as well. And we will work with our chair of finance committee as Doug can work that into his work plan and bring back ideas. Does that sound okay to council? Okay, great. Any other questions, Richard, since this was what you had brought up? Does that sound?
No, I appreciate the group thinking, and I appreciate the mayor and Doug kind of having something ready to speak to, and thanks for everybody's time.
Okay, great. All right, we also have the railroad quiet zone discussion, and this was a request from Councilmember Morales to go over, and so our public works staff has prepared just a quick overview to introduce some discussion on this topic. So Esco, I'm gonna give it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor. Can everyone now see the train there in the slide?
Yep,
Yes?
I think so.
Okay, great. I wanted to say, this topic, the idea of railway quiet zones in Mount Vernon, I certainly have a lot of empathy for it, since today I scaled off the distance from my bedroom to the railroad tracks, and it's 350 feet or so. Anyway, in Mount Vernon, just to give you a context of how we'd have to look at this a little bit, mainline, of course, the mainline track, everyone knows, goes through our town north to south, bisecting right through the middle of it. 17 trains a day or more, and they travel at about 45 miles an hour. There's 8 crossings, and 9 if you count the one clear down at Hickox that's closed to the public but open to emergency vehicles. We have a challenging set of circumstances when it comes to this topic. It's in an urban setting, so you have I-5, the railway, and the Skagit River all together, and makes it challenging for geometry and sound and noise and sight and everything. Anyway, you have this long horizontal curve right here in the middle of the map here to get, in the railway tracks getting around the hill and going underneath I-5, which, is noisy. If you stood on the side of a freeway with a decibel meter, it's about 90 decibels of ambient noise. So that noise also contributes to the challenge of dealing with the sound of the trains and what they do for safety. And so also it's part of the evidence, the solid, sad evidence that, over the last 20 years, the city's actually had several fatalities that are associated with a railway line. Okay, now just to give you just a general what the protocol is when a train comes into town, they sound their omnidirectional horn, which just means it just blares out in all directions. And they sound it on the approach to each crossing, and then they sound it at the crossing. And they do some sort of long and short blast that they use depending on the type of the crossing. So in our town, what would a quiet zone look like? It would, you'd get rid of the omnidirectional train horn. That'd be presumably the main goal here. And these quiet zones, they end up being like at least a mile long, because you have to have like a half a mile either side of a intersection. So it's at least a mile long. But in our situation, this wouldn't be like out in the country where you could make a crossing safe in some sort of, build something that makes it totally safe and you could stop the horn and you have no horns at all. In our kind of a setting, we're going to end up with some sort of horns. You'd have to add these stationary horns near the crossings and maybe even a few more just to make sure that you're not losing safety with notifications to the pedestrians and the vehicles in the area. And of course, but it still is an improvement, because these horns are, rather than just blaring out in all directions, they're kind of directed. Matter of fact, we have one of these that's installed, it's installed and it's not hooked up. It's going to be in the next few weeks at the Riverside Crossing where the project away did. So we'll be able to see what one of those special horns sounds like real soon. Okay, and then the last point on this slide is just when you're going through this process, almost definitely you're going to end up with having to do some other physical improvements, whether it's full crossing gates or median dividers or fencing or all of those things. You'll invariably end up doing something like that. So then just the last point I should make about this is the process for a quiet zone. It's difficult. It's controlled by the Federal Railway Administration. You're going to have to do a feasibility study that meets their specifications, and there's a long process to get through that. If you succeed in that and you can establish a quiet zone, again, not to repeat myself, but you're still not getting rid of horns. You're replacing the omnidirectional horn with the site-specific automated horns, and I'm not sure that that's worth doing for the cost and effort. But that is, of course, your decision, not mine. And then the last slide, Bill Bullock helped me with all this research, and we just put this slide on here. This is the flow chart that helps you figure out how to get through the feasibility study with the Federal Railway Administration. So it is not a trivial task, and we have a challenging set of circumstances that argue against, quiet zones.
Just a quick question for Esco. If I understand what you're saying correctly, is if City Council wanted to move down a direction of having safe zones, we would be responsible to provide all of the safety updates or upgrades to the rail crossings. The railroad wouldn't be; they'd just be not blowing their one particular horn. We'd be responsible for crossings and any kind of noise making apparatus. I heard gates and fences. Is that what I understand? That responsibility, financial responsibility, would fall on the city?
That's correct. Yeah.
So
it's our responsibility.
Okay, and in turn, would any liability then fall on the city if we were to create these quiet zones and didn't provide, by some attorneys interpretation, didn't provide adequate safety and somebody were to be injured? Would that responsibility then fall back to us?
Well, I defer to our attorney, but I should say that, again, to get over this bar, that's what this whole feasibility study and everything else is. You're not they're not going to, their intention, Federal Railway Administration is not going to allow us to degrade the safety from where it is. And so, you know, in order to jump over that bar, we're going to have to do all these things, and they're not trivial. Yeah.
Right.
And
But my assumption is that if there's a safety violation currently, that liability would fall on the railroad. If we took away and made these quiet zones, I guess Kevin can answer that question. Would we then be assuming the liability aspect of it also?
You know, Councilmember Hulse, it's hard to say without getting into hypotheticals and facts. But what I can tell you is what ESCO, I think, has already said, which is the regulation of the railroad, including the safety, is federally regulated. And we're preempted from basically many, if not almost all types of requirements through our police powers and how that railroad is to be operated in terms of safety, in terms of commerce, and that has been preempted by federal regulations. So I think they're going to be very prescriptive of what will be required before trains would be allowed to diminish their public safety apparatus. And at that point, it's a matter of if those rules are followed, then I think there would be a presumption that people have used an ordinary standard of care, given it was the industry standard prescribed by the federal regulations. Who would be responsible for crossings and maintenance? Typically, that is the railroad. But certainly the city could be named as a co-defendant. And certainly if the city were to have a responsibility to maintain those public safety features, there could be factual arguments against the city if those weren't maintained.
the railroad would probably set that up so that we would pay them, but we would pay for the maintenance of that. All those in perpetual, all those horns and everything would be maintained, and we'd pay the bill. That's the way it'd probably be set up.
So I know that we just gave this is just such a brief overview because I wanted council to hear some of the things, provide you with the handouts in your packet from the federal government. Before we really spend a lot of time, I know some of the cost considerations from jurisdictions that are, closer to us, Bellingham and Whatcom County were working on things. They were looking at spending, I believe it was over $2-something million for 2 crossings to upgrade. There have been kind of figures in the past said it would be, could be up to $1 million per crossing in order to complete the safety upgrades. But of course, we haven't done our own feasibility. The feasibility study the federal government would require would cost a significant amount of money as well. And so that's why we just thought we'd introduce the topic, have you think about it, or if you have feelings at this point before we went down this pathway. I think one of the biggest realizations with ESCO's research for us was we won't eliminate horns like at all. It'll just be a directional horn, which would probably be just as loud, just in a certain direction. So I thought that was something new that I hadn't heard before as well. So.
Yeah, this is physically just going down there. Look, it's not a good place to not have horns of some kind. It's if you're down there by the interstate and you're a pedestrian and you're near the railroad tracks, I mean, that's why at Riverside, our crossing that we just did with a $1.4 million grant, that's what we installed there, was another horn at that location to improve the safety at that intersection. We're not taking away the horns, we're adding to them because our condition is a very challenging one. It's not a place I would, and again, I personally have a lot of empathy for, my house is very close to the railroad tracks. So I understand what we're talking about.
For me, I think I'm on. For me, the costs involved would be prohibitive. Secondly, Public Works has got plenty of projects to take on. and complete. And I just don't know about committing staff time to go through this whole feasibility study and the application process and everything. I don't think there's been a lot of concern from the public on this. And I just don't see where we'd have the funding. So I can say I appreciate the information that was provided, but moving forward, I think it would be kind of a waste of time for council and for staff.
I agree. I mean, some people love the horns, some people hate them. We don't live out in Edison. I think they tried to do some of this out there, but you're talking about out in the middle of nowhere. And we got 5 crossings. It's a dead end, in my opinion.
Following up with Councilmember Holst and Councilmember Molinar, I just want to thank Director Esco for putting this presentation together. It makes sense what you are presenting here. The costs are extremely high. Wouldn't be much of a quiet zone, like you mentioned. The horns wouldn't be going away. If anything, we would be adding more horns. So that's painting a clearer picture as to what this would really mean. And it would just put on another major topic on your department. So I wouldn't want to make your job harder. I don't think the council would want to make your job harder. So I thank you for that, okay? Thanks.
Thank you. I have a related question, if I can, and I'd heard something about the BNSF crossing on the Skagit River north of town, that they were starting to look at feasibility of redesign and replacement of that bridge. Is that something you've heard? And the reason I'm asking is I'm wondering if there's any opportunity to think at one point we were talking about sort of overpass, underpass situations, and I wonder if that's some sort of opportunity to improve traffic flow on Hogue. It seems like a long shot, but I'm just curious if that's out there.
Well, I haven't heard anything on detail lately, but that is certainly the bridge over the Skagit River. Yes, has been discussed in one way or another for many, many years. And you know, we would want to pay attention to what you're just talking about. If there's any opportunity to do anything with the Hogue situation, I don't know if it'll be feasible or not. I mean, if it was something on our backs entirely, I would more focus to the College Way place first, but you might have a low hanging, or no, I mean, you might have a chance to do something, but I'll check around because I haven't heard anything new.
I haven't heard anything new. It seems like it was maybe a year ago, but it's certainly one of the most dangerous bridges in the area. So it will be replaced.
It needs to be, yeah, for many reasons. Plus, you know, it's also a choke point on the Skagit River and dams up a whole bunch of logs and becomes all kinds of problems.
Yeah, but that's allowed. I bring it up because that's allowed area with a lot of houses near it, more so than some of the other crossings, and two, because Hogue is a dangerous area and it backs up quite a bit. So anyhow, thank you for the digression, and let us know if you hear anything.
We talked about this years ago and had BNSF come in. Remember that, ESCO? And it at the end of the day, the railroad is responsible for 2%, which doesn't even cover the cost of the permits to even put a new bridge in.
Right.
And then when we asked him about it, it's like, well, who's going to pay for this? It came down to, well, state, local, and you know, municipal governments. And it's like, well,
2% of what? 2% of, I'm sorry.
That's how much the railroad is liable for putting in money.
Grade separations.
Yeah, grade separations.
Oh, okay.
Grade separations.
So
You're
like
mostly on your own.
Yeah, so
Right.
it's just, I mean, you're just hammered by it.
They own the bridge. If we want it's our problem, is what they're saying. On the other hand, if the bridge is raised, then can we raise the you know, or lower the road? So
yeah, I think it was coming out to 5 million a crossing, if I remember right.
Like 30 to 35 million for a grade separation.
Yep.
At least. Yeah, I would, if we had to spend our money, I'd spend it on college and College Way, and that'd be, yeah, north of 30 million easy.
I think that conversation, Commissioner Dahlstead used to talk about that, that if the Burlington was doing the bridge, that the city would do a grade separation, but so that's where that, I think, comes from. Okay. Any other questions about the quiet zones? For the public, we get inquiries every so often, and so we always try and refer them to the federal government brochures that we had passed along to council. What I think we will also do is maybe have our slides that ESCO had tonight available that we can send the public as well. We'll I think Juan was probably taking notes, so we'll send you the slides. So if you'd like to share that with any of your constituents who ask about it. So, okay. Let's see. That's what we had listed under for the good of the order.
I have a quick, I have a quick thing, Mayor.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Kind of a cool thing. I'll share my screen real quick.
Okay.
Is it working? So,
there we go.
Do you know where this is?
Yes. Colson Trail.
Yeah. So this picture is only 2 hours old. As you can see, we have a lighted trail all the way to 18th Street. So this picture just happens to have 8 of the lights in it.
Nicely done.
It's very cool. PSE just finished up with their lights literally 4 hours ago.
Awesome. Thank you, Bill, for sharing that. I know the public is going to love it. I can't wait to have people walk on there.
It's pretty cool. I'm happy.
That's great. Okay, the one thing that I had talked to most everyone about was phase two with the COVID pandemic restrictions and the possibility of meeting in person. I think of course, I try and remember all the different conversations. At this point, meeting in person would be allowed, of course, with certain precautions. 25% capacity in the room where the council would meet. And so I was just trying to get a feel for what council would like to try and do. Staff has been working very diligently trying to figure out the technological portion of this, the numbers of people. So for instance, 25% capacity in the courtroom is 24 people. When you count council members, myself, staff members, there would be a smaller amount of the public that could come depending on what staff members are there for that evening. We're also required to have overflow rooms if folks can't all fit in one room. So we would have to set up the multi-purpose room at council chambers in order to accommodate if there was larger groups of the public. So we do have dividers and things for safety as we would sit on the dais together. We looked at trying to space out council members, but it gets really difficult for trying to then have it on TV when everyone's all over the room since we have one camera. So we had figured we would all be on the dais. So just thought I'd throw that out for conversation and thoughts from the council as a group, what you think you want us to work toward.
I'm ready to go back. I'm ready to go back, Mark. Sorry, I got in ahead of you.
So as much as I'd like to get back to regular meetings, when we start limiting access to the public into those rooms, I think we're going to raise some questions and have some concerns. And the legislature is in phase 2. The legislature is still not meeting in person. They're doing everything via Zoom. I think we should. My personal thought is we should probably take a lead from our legislature and go back into session, full-time session, when they're able to meet all together.
All right, my turn. Recently, I had a constituent say, "Do you guys always agree on everything?" And I said, no, we don't always. And this is one of those times where I'm going to respectfully disagree with Councilmember Holst. It is no secret that I have had nothing but connection issues for the last 6 to 8 weeks now. I desperately miss each and every one of you, and I think that we can get together and we can do this responsibly with all of the correct PPP in place. And I think we need to get back to business, and we need to just normalcy. So I want to go back. Okay.
I'll warn you, Melissa, I won't be able to see the screen if I have to wear a mask because they fog up and I can't see without the glasses on.
We don't have to wear masks, Mark. We've got the clear, what are they, Jill?
I can bring my welder's helmet.
Face shields.
Yeah, the face shields.
Other thoughts for council?
Let's see. My thought. I think Councilmember Holst brought up a good idea that maybe we should follow suit or follow lead with our legislature. If they're not doing it, maybe we could follow in their footsteps as well. If we were to do it, I would like some consultation with the health department to make sure, hey, you know, is this really the best option that the city council can do? Yeah, and if so, would we do masks? Masks would be much more effective than the face shields. I think the face shields would still let out some droplets. I wouldn't want to be passing my germs to other council members. And I'm sure other council members wouldn't want to be doing the same. So those would be my 2 cents that I would like to leave at the table. Just make sure that we get the right consultation in place, if that's a direction that we decide to take. But if we're going by the general feel, my general feeling right now would be, I would be okay to just continue waiting to make sure things get back to better rates.
Gary, any thoughts? Or Richard or Iris?
Oh my. If I have to wear a mask for another hour in a day, I am kind of getting a little tired because I wear it all day. I do like to see facial expressions, and I don't understand why, if we had plexiglass on both sides, what the problem would be. But I'm kind of with Mark on, I really don't feel like, I want to be able to see people's expressions, and at least when we're Zooming, I can see people's expressions. And so that's my, but I'm kind of whatever.
Okay.
I can meet and I can Zoom. Been doing it for a long time.
Iris, do you want to go before me? I'll just jump in that I'm sure we'll figure this out. I'm anxious to get back together too, but I'm not 100% confident we could do it safely and bring the public into the facility safely. Yet it seems like risks are decreasing, vaccines are increasing. So maybe it's one of those things where we, just hold our horses for a month and then think about having a couple of, in-person meetings a month for the council meetings that are necessary, and then maybe we could do some committee meetings. So I'm some sort of hybrid, but I'm not super anxious. I think the risk is decreasing, and we want to make sure everybody's safe.
Mhm.
But I am anxious to get together, though.
For me, if we have to meet in person, then I don't have any objection. But if it's up to me, I still have my concerns because I've been away for a year. I haven't been around people because um, I know this is serious. Then, but if I have to come, then I can come and just take my precautions.
Okay. Okay. So what I am hearing is the staff is going to continue to plan for when we go back. Because really the only thing that I believe would change is that room capacity depending on different phases. We would do a consultation with L&I in order to have a work plan approved just because of staff being engaged. And so we would definitely have both public health and L&I weigh in on what we've planned to do. So why don't staff continue to move forward with that so that it is in place when we're ready to go? And maybe that's, in a couple weeks or as soon as we can. Does that sound okay to everybody? I didn't hear a real clear, I almost saw a split of go back or not. But we do have to have those plans approved. So, even if we wanted to do that next Wednesday, we're not going to be ready for that with our stamp of approval. So we will do our plan. We will let council know when we've been approved, and then we'll come back for a decision. Does that sound okay? Okay, great. Thank you.
Mayor,
Yes.
Did I hear well? Then we have to be approved to come and meet in person.
We have to have a plan approved for through the Labor and Industries for employees. So that just means that we have to show how we're going to separate people, that we're going to have masking requirements, all of that. We just have to show how we're actually going to conduct it safely.
I see. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So we'll come back when we've got that approval and then have another discussion on when you want to actually start. Okay, great. Then that, I believe, kind of takes care of our topics for tonight, unless I was missing something.
Jill, I wanted to
Oh, go ahead.
chime in. I'd like to at least have a discussion. We don't have to do it this evening, but I'd like to have a discussion about kind of the council code and how, what kind of rules we operate under and what we do. And just an example of that, an example of that was the discussion we had about contracts and things on that order. That's a council ruling. I'd also like to have a discussion on committee agenda requests. It seems that right now anybody can throw a committee agenda request out there and it ends up as part of our committee meeting. Personally, I think that we ought to have a majority of the council agree that we want to have a particular item on a committee agenda rather than just having one person throw something out that maybe the rest of us don't care to hear about, or I throw and the other 6 council members don't care to hear about it. That would give me the opportunity to then go and investigate it myself on my own, contact staff, or do whatever I need to do. But I think if we're going to have our committees tend to run along, and if we're going to continue to have committee agenda requests, I think we should have a majority of the council agree to put that request on the future meetings.
Okay. I wrote down just kind of take a revision of the council code, and does that also entail committee agenda requests? And that's something I know our city attorney's had his eye on for quite a while, as that code's pretty old. So we will work that in somehow. Okay. Okay, that completes then our agenda items. I'll ask our city attorney if there's a need for an executive session this evening.
Yes, Mayor, I'd invite the members of the City Council and the Mayor to meet in executive session for a period of 20 minutes to discuss with legal counsel, enforcement action, litigation, or potential litigation to which the city, the governing body, or a member acting in an official capacity is or is likely to become a party when public knowledge regarding such discussion is likely to result in either adverse legal or adverse financial consequence to the city pursuant to RCW 423110 subsection 1I, and moreover, to discuss the selection of a site or the acquisition of real estate by lease or purchase when public knowledge regarding such consideration would cause a likelihood of increased price pursuant to RCW 423110 subsection 1B. Again, 20 minutes, no action after.
Okay, thank you then. With that will be adjourned at 8:20, and I'll ask council to stay on while TV 10 prepares us for an exec session.